Hey, what's going on everybody? Welcome back to Football Talk with Vinny, and in today's video, we're going to go over my top 5 teams that are maybe going to trade for Carson Wentz. So obviously, now with it being the offseason, we're going to get into more trades and free agency and stuff like that. So I kind of want to start the very first video with talking about Carson Wentz. Obviously, it's been rumored for months now since the season ended that they're maybe going to try to trade him and see what they can get for him, if they can get anything, obviously, with his play. It was pretty bad over this last year. So I'm actually going to start with the money because that's obviously the most important part. And when you're trading for a player, right, you have to know how much you're going to have to pay him, how much salary cap are you going to have. And also I'll go into like teams that can realistically trade for him. Obviously, we're not going to do teams like the football team because I just don't see the Philadelphia Eagles trading Carson Wentz to a team within the division. I actually have the numbers here, so I'm going to go over them real quick. So for the Philadelphia Eagles, for them to cut Carson Wentz, they'd actually have to pay him $59 million. If he stayed on the roster, they owe him $34 million. And if they were to trade him, they only owe him the guaranteed salary, which actually equals out to roughly about $34 million. So if they traded Carson Wentz, it's about the same as they would pay if they just had him on the roster, But the reason why you trade him is because next year, if you trade him, you don't owe him any money, right? Because you've already paid the bonus money. So if you're the Philadelphia Eagles, you would save, I think it's $31 million of cap space for next year that you'd have to spend on other players. Whereas if he's on your roster this year, his cap hit, I believe, is around like $23 million for next year if he was on your roster. And then with that $59 million cap hit, if you release him, that's the reason why Philly is actually in a situation where they have to trade him, right? Because if they cut him, he's owed just too much dead money that you can't build a roster if you're going to pay your quarterback that's not even on your roster $60 million, especially with the cap roughly supposed to be around that $180 million mark. You're essentially paying your quarterback who's not on your team a third of your cap space, right? And now you have to pay the other 53 men on your actual roster, $120 million. That's going to be very difficult to do. Now, the good news, though, is a team that trades for him doesn't have to pay him any of the signing bonus. That all is prorated through the contract. So the team trading for Wentz actually owes him $25 million in 2021, $22 million in 2022, $25 million in 2023, and $26 million in 2024. So that is $98 million over 4 years, which averages out to $24.5 million. Now, that might seem like a lot if you're not good with contracts and all that stuff, you're not familiar with it. $24.5 million for quarterback actually would put him as the 19th highest paid quarterback. So again, that's very manageable when you're talking about the position, right? Only paying him the 19th highest rated salary for quarterbacks means he only has to be an average level starter for you to get equal compensation to what you're actually paying him. And right now on overthecap.com has actually 8 teams that are projected to have enough cap space without making any moves in order to sign him. So first, I'm going to start with the more easy ones that everyone's heard of. And then towards the end, I'm going to go to a couple of surprise teams that maybe you have not heard of that I think should, look into trading for Carson Wentz. So first one, very obvious. We're going to go with the Colts, right? You got Frank Reich as the head coach. He actually coached Carson Wentz in Philly during that, magical season, right? It kind of just makes sense. They have such a great offensive line, so Carson Wentz will be protected. He'll be able to have time to throw the ball, right? You'll get T.Y. Hilton. They got a lot of cap space, right? You not only can trade for Carson Wentz, but you can also sign some receivers maybe in free agency. That might be one of the Colts' biggest weaknesses. And essentially, if Carson Wentz can go back to even just playing average quarterback play, kind of with what Phillip Rivers gave them last year, you are a Super Bowl contender. Second one on the list, Chicago Bears. Obviously, you've probably heard this one a bunch of times too, right? So let me get into it. So the Chicago Bears are actually projected to be right at the cap. I think right now the projections are somewhere around like -$6 million, but that was, I think, based on a $175 million cap number. And the projected cap is supposed to be around 180, so it's actually going to go a little higher than they thought it was going to go. But again, I think we'll know those numbers towards March 1st, what the actual cap numbers are. So with that being said, though, if you're the Chicago Bears, you have to free up $24 million somewhere because you still have to pay him, $25 million. You're going to have to be able to fit his salary. So in order to do that, there's going to have to be a couple of cuts. So I was doing some research. Some guys like, I think it's Bobby Massey is owed $5.4 million they could save by releasing him. Buster Screen, 2.7, and then Jimmy Graham could save about $7 million. So those 3 players will get you to $15 million, and then you still need to make some cuts or maybe restructure some deals. So some guys that make sense are guys like Khalil Mack, maybe try to restructure his deal. He's got a pretty high cap number, right? So some guys that are on some big time contracts, you try to restructure them. And what a restructure is just you're pushing some of his cap hit down for the current season, and you're raising his cap number for the following years, right? So you're essentially borrowing from, today's money, and you're going to have to pay it back tomorrow. Kind of like what the Saints have done, which is why they're in a ridiculous cap situation, but we'll get to that in a different video. But as for the Bears, obviously, kind of got to be a good move there, right? You want average quarterback play, I think, at this point if you're Chicago. You still have an elite defense. Your offensive players are pretty decent. Obviously, I think if you bring in Carson Wentz, that kind of means you won't be able to sign Allen Robinson, so you're going to lose your best receiver, right? Because you won't be able to find the $25 million of cap space to sign him, and then also be able to sign Allen Robinson. It looks like he's going to get north of $16-17 million a season as well. But I think, if you're Chicago, you maybe use one of your draft picks, because you finally have them now because of that trade you made with the Raiders for Khalil Mack. You had your first 2 round picks. The last 2 years you didn't have. Maybe now you use this year's first round pick and you take a wide receiver, right? So if you can get Carson Wentz with a wide receiver, right? And again, you just need average level quarterback play. Chicago made the playoffs last year with, below average quarterback play. Another one I think everyone's heard of, which is New England Patriots, right? They have a ton of cap space, right? It makes a lot of sense, right? If you bring in a guy like Carson Wentz and you can get him to start playing average or above average level quarterback play, if you're, Bill Belichick, you need to improve the quarterback position. I think Bill is like 69 years old. I don't think he wants to do a full rebuild with the New England Patriots, right? He's probably going to want to just kind of get some players and try to make a run at the playoffs next year, right? They did win, I think it was 7 games last year with, Cam Newton having the whole COVID for a couple weeks, and towards the end of the season, he wasn't playing as great as he was towards the beginning of the year. So I think if you could stabilize that quarterback position, use a bunch of that cap space that you have this year to maybe sign some wide receiver free agents to get whoever plays quarterback for you some help, I think would be a great idea. And I think Bill Belichick, even though, again, Tom Brady won the Super Bowl, so a lot of people over the last week or so have been talking about how Bill Belichick is not as important to the New England Patriots organization as Tom Brady was. And, obviously there's some debate for that. But I think Bill Belichick, you should, if you're watching this and you're not part of it, you should still understand that he's a very exceptional coach, right? And the way he coaches his team, again, he had 8 guys, I think, opt out on defense this year. And his defense was still rated in the top end defense. Not only that, but they did win 7 games. It was almost like what Mike Tomlin did the year before when Big Ben got hurt and they were just rotating, Duck Hodges and the other quarterback, and they still were able to win 8 games with that roster, right? You gave a lot of credit to Mike Tomlin, so I think the same goes with Bill Belichick. So now I'm going to get into 2 teams. I'm not sure how often I've heard them mentioned for Carson Wentz, but we'll get into my number 4 team, which is the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, the Pittsburgh Steelers right now are currently projected to be $30 million over the cap, which means they have to clear $30 million of salary just to get to even, and then you have to clear another $24 million to be able to sign Carson Wentz. So this one's going to be very difficult. So for starters, I believe if Big Ben decides to retire, because again, I think if Big Ben comes back, you're actually not in the market for a quarterback. But if Big Ben decides to retire, you actually are going to save $19 million of salary cap because you only have to pay Big Ben his signing bonus. You don't have to pay him his contract if he decides to retire. So that right there, by saving 19, only puts you $11 million over the cap, right? So then you have a couple of, decisions you can make, right? So you have guys like David DeCastro who are on the final years of their deal, so their cap hit is pretty large. David DeCastro's at $14.5 million. Pouncey is at $8 million you could save if he retires. I think he's, kind of leaning on towards retirement. So if he retires, you would save $8 million there. If you decide to extend David DeCastro, right, what you can do is you can sign him to a long-term deal and make his cap hit for this year very low, $2, $3, $4 million. That would save you $10, $11 million in the cap, right? And then you start to get close to even, right? And then guys like Steven Nelson, the cornerback, right? He's got a $14 million cap hit, but he's a 28-year-old corner. So if you sign him to a 3, 4, 5-year extension, you could lower his cap hit, kind of the same as DeCastro, and free up another $10, $12 million. And right there with just a couple of those moves, you're right around that 20 million mark. And I think if you're Pittsburgh, right, Big Ben obviously in the playoff game was very bad, but during the regular season he was okay. But even during the regular season, it was kind of like with Drew Brees. You could tell he was throwing a lot of short passes, and they were just trying to manage his arm throughout the season. Whereas you get a guy like Carson Wentz, if he can give you average level quarterback play with that defense, I think you have, the makings of a championship caliber roster. So now the last one that I kind of want to focus in on, because I think it's a very interesting one, because I think most people are not really talking about it. But I'm going to say that the Denver Broncos are another team that maybe should consider trading for Carson Wentz. Right, the way Drew Lock played last year, I understand he got hurt, but even when he played, he wasn't exceptionally great. I think he was in the bottom 3, along with Carson Wentz, to be fair, in completion percentage for starting quarterbacks that actually qualified for that stat. So both of them didn't play exceptionally well. I think the excuse can be made for obviously both quarterbacks, but at least from Carson Wentz's side, the receivers that he's throwing to are nowhere near as talented, I think, as the receivers that Denver has, right? So if you're Denver and you can bring a guy like Carson Wentz in, which I think John Elway has showed in the past, he's not afraid to, really either spend a high draft capital or sign big-time free agents to bring in that quarterback that John Elway believes can help him win his next Super Bowl. So obviously with this one, though, they already have the cap space to do it. So at this point, you don't have to give up much. And I think that would obviously be the determining factor if I'm the Denver Broncos and if I even want to trade for Carson Wentz, right? What is he ultimately going to get traded for? Is he going to go for a first-round pick or a second-round pick? If I'm Denver, I probably am just okay. I'll just pass and I'll stick with Drew Lock. But if it's a situation kind of like with the Rams where they had to give up a lot just to obviously get Stafford, but to unload Jared Goff's contract, if you're in a situation where you're Denver and you can just absorb, Carson Wentz's contract, and maybe you just trade, and give Philly a 3rd or maybe a 4th round pick, and you can get Carson Wentz to your team and you don't have to give up anything else. I think it's something you should consider, right? Because a 3rd or 4th round pick, more than likely the player you draft is not really going to come in and contribute and help at all this year, right? I mean, sometimes it could, but a lot of times, draft picks don't end up working out. And also, if you're Denver, right, you're getting Von Miller back next year. I think you don't want to completely tear it down. I think if you're Denver, you're not ready to go to full rebuild mode. And if you can get a quarterback with those weapons, right, to play good, right, and if Carson Wentz can kind of go back to what he was playing 2-3 years ago, right, when he had a bunch of weapons and, the offensive line was really good in Philly, right, and you saw him flourish with a lot of weapons, I think Denver can kind of provide that same kind of structure, right? Their offensive line's not as good as Philly's, but maybe they use the rest of that cap space to maybe sign a veteran. Maybe you use your first round pick instead of a corner, which is they've been projected to take in the first round. Maybe you take one of those tackles if they fall, right? Or maybe just the next guy, the Valdir guy. So maybe you take an offensive lineman with that first round pick to kind of shore up that offensive line to protect Carson Wentz or Drew Lock if you decide to stick with, Drew Lock as your quarterback, and you kind of give those receivers that you have a lot of young 23, 24-year-old weapons on the outside to kind of, make any quarterback actually look a lot better. And then the last thing I kind of want to go over with the Carson Wentz deal is if you're any of those teams that trade for him or any teams that maybe I didn't name that does trade for him, just so you're aware, if you were to trade for Carson Wentz, most of that money is actually not guaranteed because, again, the way it works is the team that trades the player away pays all the guaranteed money. The team that acquires the player pays for all the roster bonuses, right, and any guaranteed salary, so you would be on the hook for that. But the way it's structured in Carson Wentz's contract is for obviously the 2021 season, you would owe him his whole salary of $25 million, but he also has an option on March 20th of 2021 where after that date, if he's on your team, you owe him $15 million of his guaranteed salary for the 2022 season, right? So obviously you would be on the hook for 2021, and then on March 19th of 2022, the remainder of his base salary for the 2022 season becomes fully guaranteed. So the way it works is obviously you would be on the hook for Carson Wentz's $25 million for this season, and then if he plays bad, you can theoretically cut him for next year before he plays a game, and you would only have to pay him again that $15 million, which again is a lot to pay a player that's not going to be on your roster. But even if he played for you that second season, so then he's guaranteed that second year of salary of $22 million, but after that, he's not guaranteed any more money. So essentially, it's like a 2-year deal where you're paying him 2 years of almost kind of guaranteed money, and then after that, you can get out of the deal and not pay him anything, because the way his options work is for 2023, he's owed a $5 million roster bonus on March 19th, and again on March 19th of 2024, he's owed another $5 million roster bonus. So if you cut him before, March 19th of 2023, you don't owe him any dead money on your cap for either of those last 2 years. So again, you're essentially getting Carson Wentz for 1 year, and then you could cut him after the first year and only have a $15 million cap hit for that year if he plays really bad, or if he plays okay and you give him that second year, you pay him the $25 million for the second year, or excuse me, the $22 million for the second year, and then after that, you don't owe him any money. So that's it for the video. Those are my 5 teams. Comment below, let me know what you think about those 5 teams and any additional teams that you think maybe that I missed. If your favorite team maybe should trade for them, or if you are a fan of any of those 5 teams I mentioned, how do you feel about maybe Carson Wentz coming to your team? Obviously, I know he had a very down year, but I think, we have to realize that, not every quarterback is going to be a Hall of Fame caliber quarterback and going to have a great season every year. Some quarterbacks have down years, and then the next year they can have a great year. But make sure to get in the comments. Just let me know what you think. Obviously, make sure if you liked the video, make sure to like it and subscribe to my channel so you can see more videos as I post more throughout the off season. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to making another one.